Tonight, we're going to look at a rather poorly understood topic, how to raise glutathione, what works and what doesn't. So I understand that most of you have seen my previous presentation on raising glutathione with Immunical. For those of you that didn't, let me just cover this in a few slides. Immunical is an undenatured whey protein isolate that's been clinically proven to raise glutathione levels. And if you did, in fact, miss that last presentation, you could find it here. So I'll just give you a moment to write down that YouTube address. Immunical appears in the American PDR, a physician's desk reference, and the Canadian CPS, the Compendium of Pharmaceutical Specialties. Now, one of these books sits on the desk of every single doctor and every single pharmacist in North America. It lists and describes all of the drugs that a doctor can prescribe. Now, when I say clinically proven, I'm talking about published clinical studies that appear in peer-reviewed journals. Not in-house studies or reposts, not in marketing pieces, published in medical and scientific journals. Now, I've presented a book that contains all of the studies on Immunical last session. So for those of you who didn't receive this, please ask the person who invited you to this call, and he or she will send you a copy. And in it, you'll find 92 papers, including 36 human studies, and most importantly, 26 placebo-controlled, double-blind human studies. These are the kind that I believe is necessary for any doctor to have in hand when recommending a product to a patient. Going on to the topic of what has been shown to raise glutathione levels successfully in humans, I'm going to refer you to PubMed.gov. This is the most widely used, by far, website managed by the National Institutes of Health that contains the original publications of published papers across the world. Now, every research accesses this website pretty much daily, and I'm sure that the majority of you are familiar with it. So here we are at PubMed.gov, and we've entered the term glutathione into the search box. And you see PubMed has retrieved over 195,000 articles, 195,000. But these represent all types of papers, not just clinical trials, but also review papers, theoretical papers, biochemical explanations, and so on. So we need to trim this search down a bit to get what we want. So on PubMed, you can use filters. Let's first use the filter randomized controlled trial. And let's add one more filter, humans, because it's really human trials are the only ones that really count. So look at the search results now. What started off as an overwhelming 195,000 articles is now shrunk down to less than 2,000 articles. And it's these that we're going to be considering today. Again, it's studies that are double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled, done in humans, that we should be using to guide our recommendations. So let's get back on topic. The question is asked, how do I raise glutathione levels in the human body? You would think that given all the options available in the market, that there would be a simple answer, but in reality, the answer is a bit more complex and deserves a closer look. Now, in this discussion, we're going to look at the most popular ways, oral glutathione, cysteine, please note the difference in spelling, NAC or N-acetylcysteine, undenatured whey protein, and more. Let's start with eating glutathione. The instinctual choice to first make is to consider oral forms of glutathione. Now, these have been greatly popular throughout the years and still remains a common approach. And there are hundreds of companies that market and sell oral glutathione, even in forms like L-glutathione and, of course, liposomal glutathione. Well, they're all oral forms of glutathione. So the next couple slides might be the most important series of slides that you see today. So pay attention. If the only thing you remember from this presentation is this short series of slides, then I feel like my job is done. You cannot eat glutathione itself and expect it to raise glutathione levels in your body. It's very tempting to believe that this would be an easy solution, but it's not. When you eat glutathione, it becomes rapidly broken down in your digestive tract. And humans in particular have very high levels of an enzyme called GGT, a gamma glutamyl transferase, in our gut. And GGT destroys glutathione, and very little of it, if any, actually makes it to your cells. You see, glutathione is produced in our own cells. Our cells are little glutathione manufacturing plants. The only way to raise whole body glutathione is to feed our cells the specific nutrients, the specific building blocks that they need to build glutathione molecules. And these specific nutrients are referred to as precursors. We can't use glutathione itself. We need glutathione precursors. You got it? So if you're tired and had enough of this lecture, you can leave now, but I have some more interesting stuff coming up. Now remember, there are over 95,000 articles freely available on glutathione, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of articles published that show that oral glutathione is not effective. And thousands that remark the same. And this is very well established in the literature, and you could just browse some of these titles and names of articles. But wait, many people will pull this article out, this study, to show that oral glutathione does in fact raise body levels of glutathione. Now, this paper was written in 2015. It was a 6-month study done in 54 adults. So this single study, let's take a closer look. It was published in the European Journal of Nutrition. Take note of that. And also take note of the lead author, one John P. Ritchie Jr. And you'll see why this is important in a minute. John Ritchie Jr. Another thing to pay attention to is that the study was funded by the largest manufacturer of glutathione supplements, Kyowa Hakko Bio Company. They make the very popular brand called Cetria glutathione. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily implying that a biased outcome has resulted, but it does remain suspect. Also, given that there are over 195,000 articles on glutathione and most of them agree that oral glutathione is not effective, this study was roundly criticized and stands pretty much alone in its findings. But people still refer to it, unfortunately. Now, what about liposomal glutathione? This has made a huge splash in the glutathione world. By coating glutathione in a lipid layer, it protects the glutathione from being broken down in the gastrointestinal tract, and it supposedly gets effectively absorbed. And it's being treated as a breakthrough in glutathione delivery. There are literally hundreds of startup companies promoting its use. It's exploding in popularity. And there are many health professionals, including medical doctors, spouting its benefits. All this is great, but does it work? Well, there's a single paper that everyone uses as so-called proof. Here it is, written in 2018, this single paper. Oral supplementation with liposomal glutathione elevates body stores of glutathione and markers of immune function. Sounds very impressive. So note that it also appears in the same journal that the previous oral glutathione paper did, the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Now, that's not bad in itself, but who's the main author? Well, it's our old friend, John P. Ritchie Jr., the same guy who published a single study on oral glutathione. Here he is again showing that liposomal glutathione works as well. A little suspicious, no? And furthermore, this study was funded by yet another maker of glutathione, in this case liposomal glutathione, by a company called Researched Nutritionals. But let's assume that all of that is acceptable. Let's take a closer look at the study itself. It was a 1-month pilot study. Now, note the word pilot. 1 month, 4 weeks. They used 2 separate doses of liposomal glutathione, and there were 6 subjects per group. Yes, 6. A total of just 6 people per group. This is amazing. How do you even measure statistical significance with 6 lone people? And curiously, what they found was the group taking the lower dose of liposomal glutathione actually had a greater increase in glutathione levels than the higher group. Does that make any sense? Wouldn't you have wanted to see a placebo group? Finally, are you kidding me? No placebo control? That's right. No placebo control. Not double-blinded, not placebo-controlled, 6 subjects per group. And this is the one paper that's driving a complete industry of glutathione supplements. I'm sorry, that makes me crazy. I wish doctors would actually read the research behind a product, because any responsible physician needs to base his or her decisions on double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized human studies, and preferably on multiple studies. I'm sorry. What about intravenous or IV glutathione? This is becoming increasingly offered by many clinics. Well, intravenous glutathione does in fact work. It's undergone enough studies. But besides the risks and inconveniences associated with intravenous medications, there's something else you need to know about. The half-life of intravenous glutathione is incredibly short. The study on the upper left side of your screen used high-dose intravenous glutathione. The half-life was measured as 14 minutes. The study on the lower left used a lower dose, and the half-life was 1.6 minutes. For the intravenous glutathione product on the right, the company states a half-life of 10 minutes. So if you're interested in, let's say, a quick detox, this may be useful. But if you're interested in a chronic disease, pretty much would be an exercise in frustration. Here's an interesting video. Watch this. Patient with Parkinson's visits the doctor's office. Here he is walking down the hall. You can see the typical gait, and he turns around. And the doctor is a Dr. Perlmutter, very famous glutathione researchers. He injected him with intravenous glutathione, and look at him walk now, almost normally across the hall. This is just great. Now, the problem is, by the time he gets home, he's back to his usual impaired state. He's back in his wheelchair. But what about glutathione patches? Well, some of them don't even have glutathione in the patch. They supposedly stimulate certain chakra points in your body to stimulate glutathione production or something like that. And the ones that do have glutathione in them, well, they may possibly raise glutathione on the skin directly under the patch, but not deeper. Small studies have confirmed that glutathione can be delivered through a nebulizer. This is particularly useful in lung disease. And what about glutathione mouthwashes? There's absolutely no evidence that these work. This one, you're supposed to swish this around in your mouth, and because the glutathione is supposedly in a nano form, it gets absorbed by the buccal tissues. This is complete nonsense. All right, let's look at a few basic things before we go on. Let's look at what glutathione is made out of. Glutathione is what we call a tripeptide, meaning it's a small protein made up of 3 amino acids, those being glutamate, glycine, and cysteine. It's the cysteine that has the sulfhydryl group where most of the biological activity takes place. And as far as the glutamate and glycine amino acids go, these are easily found in most diets and appear in most meals. They are abundant in foods. And they're also not essential amino acids, so they can be obtained by eating other amino acids such as glutamic acid, glutamine, serine, threonine, and choline. So obtaining these are pretty easy. Cysteine, on the other hand, is much rarer in our diet and more difficult to obtain. Not only is it hard to get from your regular nutrition, it is also the limiting factor for glutathione synthesis. In other words, glutathione production is a function of cysteine availability. And to make it worse, finally, it's only specific forms of cysteine that are biologically active, as we will soon see. Let's look at another amino acid, cysteine. Again, please note the difference in spelling and pronunciation as compared to cysteine. Cysteine is 2 cysteine molecules that are linked together by a disulfide bond. This makes cysteine a source of cysteine. I'll say that again. Cysteine is a source of cysteine. So we can use the term bonded cysteine in place of cysteine. Here we see the 2 molecules, and note the disulfide bond between the 2 cysteine groups to form cysteine. I know this may at first be a little confusing, but at some point in time, it would be good for you to understand. Let's get back to undenatured whey protein isolate, the one represented by Immunical. Undenatured means that the original 3-dimensional shape of the protein is intact and appears as it would in its natural form. You see that the protein is wound up like a ball of wool, and this allows contact between the individual strands of protein to keep it in its natural shape or configuration. This allows the disulfide bonds to remain intact. So it's the 3-dimensional shape of a protein that allows it to work. Now, the problem with these whey proteins is that they are extremely sensitive to becoming denatured by heat, mechanical agitation, and other disturbances. And what denaturization does is unfold the proteins so they no longer are in their original shape. This breaks disulfide bonds, and the end result is a molecule that loses its ability to serve as a glutathione precursor. An unfolded protein does not behave like the original natural protein. Let's take an extreme close-up of one fold in the much larger protein. You see that on the left, a fold where the 2 strands are physically close to each other, and this allows a bond between the cysteine in one strand to bond to a cysteine in another strand to form cysteine. In other words, bonded cysteine. On the right, the protein is unfolded and the disulfide bond is broken. This allows the exposed cysteine molecules to become oxidized and lose its potency as a glutathione precursor. Again, not easy to grasp at first, but you may want to replay this section at another time. Now, most people will wonder, well, why not just take cysteine supplements to raise glutathione? This is easily available and found everywhere on the market. Every natural food store sells cysteine. And in fact, it's promoted as a glutathione precursor. Has this been shown to be true? Well, in fact, it's not true. Eating cysteine is not an effective way to raise glutathione. It's extremely unstable in your digestive tract and is easily oxidized. Now, not only is the oxidized form of cysteine a poor glutathione precursor, it also carries a certain toxicity. Another proof of its inability to raise glutathione is the fact that cysteine is not used in conventional medicine to raise glutathione. In the 1960s, an altered form of cysteine was developed that could withstand oxidation. Biochemists added an acetyl side chain, which offered protection, and the molecule is thus called NAC or N-acetylcysteine. So NAC can resist oxidation about 15% of the time, which means that 85% is oxidized, which is why NAC has potential side effects that can be annoying. Also, in the long term, its use is limited because of this problem. We'll take another look at NAC in a few moments. Why not use cysteine? A good question that needs to be addressed. Cysteine in itself is poorly absorbed. It's prone to oxidation. It just has not shown to be a glutathione precursor, and this is why so few clinical studies have used cysteine to raise glutathione, because it doesn't work. So what actually works well to raise glutathione levels in a human being? We've seen that oral glutathione is not an efficient way to raise levels. Glutathione, because it's produced by the cell by itself. So the way to raise glutathione is to provide the cell, as we mentioned before, with the precursors or building blocks so the cell can manufacture their own glutathione. The cell requires the specific nutrients to make glutathione. That's the bottom line. And there are currently only two medically accepted ways to do this. And this you look up in your PDR or your CPS, and if you're doctors, I'm sure you have a copy handy. And you'll find two substances listed as glutathione precursors: NAC, N-acetylcysteine, and undenatured whey protein isolate, otherwise known as immunocal. NAC is the go-to drug used by doctors worldwide to raise glutathione levels. It's a remarkably effective drug, and I use it in extreme conditions, for example, to treat an acetaminophen overdose. And finally, immunocal, an undenatured whey protein isolate, and interestingly, not a pharmaceutical. And as you would have learned from my last presentation, the richest source of natural glutathione precursors. A closer look at NAC is warranted here. NAC is used universally around the world as a glutathione precursor. It literally has thousands of clinical studies published on it. It is the choice used by medical practitioners and by hospitals. And it's available by prescription and in certain countries as a supplement as well. But it has a few problems. Number one, it has what we call a short half-life, about 3 or 4 hours. So in order to keep glutathione levels continually high, it needs to be taken 3 or 4 times a day. And it has a taste and a smell that many people cannot tolerate. And so these side effects that it has, usually nausea, vomiting, cramps, and other symptoms, if you need to take it 3 or 4 times a day, well, you're going to feel 4 times the 4th time that you take it during the day. And it's also not recommended for long-term use because of the buildup of oxidized cysteine, which can develop into a situation called hypercystinemia, which is a pro-oxidant state, which is exactly what you were trying to avoid. So to recap, Undenatured whey protein isolate, also known as Immunical. This has been the subject of over 40 years of clinical study. There's a wealth of available published research articles. It shows up in some of the major medical references in the world, and it has very little adverse effects. A single oral dose of Immunical can show results days after ingestion. So which of these to choose? Well, we've already pointed out some differences that could make up your mind, but let's take a deeper dive into the biochemistry and how these two differ. Okay, this will go by rather quickly. Let's look again at how a cell makes glutathione. Well, get some glutamate. Where? Well, whey will provide you with glutamate. NAC won't. Get some cysteine. Again, whey will provide a great source of cysteine. It will also provide you with cysteine in the form of bonded cysteine. NAC works by providing cysteine as well. But remember, only about 15% of the cysteine in NAC is protected from oxidation, which means that 85% is not protected and will become oxidized, and this is the reason it carries a degree of toxicity. Now, cysteine is combined with glutamate, and this forms the molecule gamma-glutamyl-cysteine. See it there? This step is carried out through the use of an enzyme called dipeptidase. This is the rate-limiting enzyme that produces gamma-glutamyl-cysteine. So here's an important difference. Even if dipeptidase is missing or in short supply, undenatured whey protein can directly supply gamma-glutamyl-cysteine. This is a major advantage of whey over NAC. Now, glycine must be added. Where to get glycine? Well, again, whey will give you glycine, but NAC won't. Another difference. And finally, the enzyme glutathione synthase is used, and the final step is the production of glutathione. So you see, whey protein isolate fills in many more of these steps than NAC. Critical. But wait, the difference continues between these two. Whey contains all of the essential amino acids needed by humans, provides none of them. So to quickly summarize the difference between the two, both of them raise glutathione. NAC has a short half-life of 3 to 4 hours. Immunical is effective for days. NAC has side effects. Side effects are minimal and rare for whey proteins like Immunical. NAC is a great and effective drug used worldwide. Immunical not only raises glutathione, but here's a major point. Whey protein is a superior source of nutrition. In fact, it has the highest biological value of any known edible protein. Let's look at what we mean by this. What is biological value? It's a measurement of how valuable a protein is to your general metabolism. Clearly, different proteins differ in their value to your general nutrition. Eating a hot dog will not provide you with the same value than eating a nice piece of fresh salmon. And these biological values, these BVs, can be quantified. Here we see a list of different BVs from different protein sources, and we see that whey protein isolates have absolutely the highest value. So Immunical has the highest biological value of any edible protein. Immunical contains all of the essential amino acids needed by man. NAC only contains cysteine. For me, the choice is clear. Finally, let's close this webinar off by looking at cysteine, N-acetylcysteine, and glutathione, as well as liposomal glutathione. A very basic questions I ask you. Where do these supplements come from? What are their source? I'm sure you will be very surprised. Let's start with the amino acid cysteine. or L-cysteine. At the same time, we'll look at N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, which ultimately comes from the same source. The question I want you to ask yourself, are these truly natural products, and how different are they from their natural state? Why am I showing you a picture of a Chinese barber shop? Well, years ago, the major source of cysteine came from the clippings of human hair from China. No joke. Hair is an excellent source of cysteine. But a number of markets took a bit of offense, such as Jewish people and halal people, because ingesting human body parts is taboo, even hair. And I'm sure many other groups are equally repulsed by this and would elect not to use this source. So the Chinese shifted towards using duck feathers as their supply. Again, feathers are an excellent source of cysteine. So duck feathers then became the main supply. But not to be outdone, the Americans saw a business opportunity and jumped in. But they didn't use ducks, they used chickens. The chicken industry is huge in the USA, and why let these feathers go to waste? They can be profitable. Now, getting cysteine out of a feather is not easily done. You can't just squeeze a feather and cysteine comes up. It requires many steps, and these generally include chemical modification, serious steps. So although technically cysteine and N-acetylcysteine are considered natural products, but how far from natural are they really? Now let's take a look at where glutathione comes from. This will surprise you. Does it come from a plant? Does it come from an animal? Does it come from humans? Not enough people are asking these questions. It never crosses their mind to ask. Glutathione supplements come from microbes. Mostly they're derived from certain fungi, such as yeasts or Saccharomyces. These are yeasts that can produce glutathione. And there's also certain bacteria that can produce glutathione. Even strains of E. coli can produce glutathione. Yes, bacteria, but not just any regular yeast, fungus, or bacteria. These organisms have been highly engineered to produce substantially higher amounts of glutathione to be harvested. In this study, the fungus Saccharomyces cerevisiae has been altered using an enzyme called reverse transcription polymerase to shuffle the gene sequence in their DNA to produce more glutathione. Here are 3 other studies to explain other ways how to engineer this fungus to increase production as well. Engineering is Saccharomyces strains again. Engineering Saccharomyces cerevisiae by introducing bifunctional glutathione synthase gene. So they've cloned a gene into the fungus. Here is engineering by radiation. Here are a few more studies developing mutant strains to produce more glutathione. This last one here, they've fused the genes. In other words, they made a hybrid bacteria out of E. coli and streptococcus to manufacture glutathione. So, can this glutathione be considered natural? I guess it depends on what your definition of natural is. But in either case, natural or not, this glutathione is 100% genetically modified, 100% GMO. And whether being a GMO product is an issue for you or not, what really matters is whether this glutathione used orally actually does anything to a human being. And as any of you who have heard me before, the answer lies in clinical research and where is the proof. And here's a chart that covers many of the glutathione raising supplements that are out there in the market. And with these is the strength of evidence for each of these as to their effectiveness in raising glutathione. The only 2 substances that have strong clinical evidence done in human beings are NAC and undenatured whey protein isolate.